In this video, we are going to learn how to do a custom async validation using Angular and ASP.NET Core. The idea is the following. We have this form here, and if I put a name of a laptop which already exists, I have to press Save Changes, and then I will get an error up here that says there is already a laptop with name Asus SSD 1TB. But that is not very cool because, for example, I would like to receive this error message down here, and also after I press outside of this text box, I want to receive that error message, which means that we have to do a custom validation in Angular that is going to connect with our web API and is going to check for the existence of another laptop with the same name. So that is what we're going to do in this video. If you want to learn more about how to build applications with Angular and ASP.NET Core, buy my Udemy course today, link with a discount in the description of this video. Alright, so let's get to the tutorial. So we are here in our form, and what I want to do is that first I want to come to our ASP.NET Core application, to our laptop's controller, so that we can build a new endpoint. So let's come up here, it can be here, and I will say here HTTP, I will say HTTP get, and I will put here name exists, and then public async task action result of boolean, a bool, exists laptop with name, and I will receive here the name. And then I will say return await context laptops dot any async, and I will search for a laptop with the name. So name here. Alright, so we have our endpoint, so I can press Ctrl+Shift+B. Now let's come to my Angular application. I want to come to the laptop service. So laptop service should be called product service actually. Alright, so product service, let's come here and let me say public exists by name string observable. We're going to return an observable of boolean, and then I will say here return this HTTP get boolean, and then in here I will say backtick this API URL / here the name and also exists. So this that I have here is the same thing that I put here. So let's come back here. Now let me save here, and now I want to use this method from a custom validation that we're going to build. So let's come here and let me come to shared. I want to look for the shared folder, which should be around here. Here it is. In functions, I can create a new file. Laptop name is unique.ts of TypeScript. Now export function laptop name is unique, and we're going to return an async validator function. Let me put this here. I will inject the laptop service, so const laptop service equal to inject, which I call product service, but it is basically a laptop service, semicolon here. Return control abstract control. We're going to return this anonymous method that's going to return an observable of validation errors or null. In a custom validation, we can return either a validation error, which means that there was an error, in our case that there is another laptop with the same name, or null. In the case of null, this means that there are no errors. So we have to return either validation errors or null. And let me say this lambda expression. I will say first if the control is pristine, which means that nobody has touched the control. For example, if we just enter into the page that contains the form, it means that nobody has touched it, and therefore we don't want to do this validation. So, or if the control is pristine, or control value, if there is no value in the control, so if the text box is empty, then it means that there is nothing to validate. So I can say return, I cannot say null because this is an observable, and therefore I can simply return null. I have to say of null. Let me say of, let me import this from Arax.js, so this and then like this, and in this way I can return null. So return here, I will say laptop service dot exists by name, and I will pass the control value, which is the name of the laptop. I want to use the pipe function here so that I can pass several functions. The first one is going to be map from RxJS, which will allow me to map the response from my web API into an object. In our case, it's going to be either a validation error object or null. So let me say here, exists, and then this, I will say exists ternary operator. If this is true, then I want to return an object that is going to have a message property, and we will say here, there's already a laptop with that name. Otherwise, we're going to say null. Alright, so what are we doing here? What I'm saying here is that if we receive true from the web API, it means that there is already a laptop with that name, and therefore we're going to return an object, in this case, an object that has a message property, and that message property is the error message, and therefore this is what I'm going to display to the user. I want to say here, there's already, so this is what I'm going to be displaying to the user. If this is false, then we're not going to be returning this, but null. And remember that when we return null from a custom validation in Angular, it means that there was no errors, and therefore everything is okay. So after this, I'm using pipe because I want to use another function. I want to also use a catch error function just in case my web API returns an error. So let me say here, comma, catch error, and in here I will say simply of null. Of course, because if my web API is incapable of doing this validation, that is not something that I have to tell to the user. I will just say that the validation went through. Alright, so this is done. Now I can use this method in my form. So let's come to my products form component, to the TS, because I want to come here to my form builder. Here in name, I want to say, besides validators, this is for sync validators, but I want to configure an async validator. Therefore, I will say async validators colon and this. Alright, let me import this and let me do this. Also, I don't want to be executing this validator every time I do a keystroke on the text field, and therefore what I will do is that I will configure the update on property here to indicate that this will be on the blur event, which means that when we unfocus, the text box is when we're going to run these validations, so that this only runs once and not on every keystroke. Alright, so now get error messages of name, of the field name. I want to use this function to return the error message that we have here. So let me do that. Let's come here and let me say if field has error, and I will say message, and this message that I have here comes from this message that I have here. Alright, so here I can say return field get error message. Alright, so we're almost there. Let me say here products form, I want to come to the CSS because I need to make my form a little bit bigger. So mat form field with 100%, max width 500 pixels. Alright, so let's make a test. Ctrl KS, let's save everything, let's come back here, and let's come here. Let me put a name of a laptop that already exists, like this one. So click outside of this text box, click here, and you are going to see that there's already a laptop with that name. Okay, we are making progress. We are making a good progress. And also, if I say here, for example, 2, this is now a unique laptop name. If I click outside, you are going to see that the error disappears. Excellent. Now, there is a small problem. Let's come here. Let me show you. Let's come here to Visual Studio, and I want to add a delay. And let's see how our form behaves while it's doing the validation. So let me say here, task delay, and I will say 3 seconds. So let me save, and let me press Ctrl F5 to run our application. Let's come back here, and I want to refresh. I will refresh. Now let's see that if I do this, please pay attention to this button. I will click outside of here. Now, 1, 2, 3, more or less 3 or 4 seconds, because I had to run the application again, and that is why it was a little bit slow. You can see that for those 5 or 6 seconds, the button was enabled, and also there was no indication to the user that there was some validation going on. That is not a good user experience. While the validation is occurring, the Save Changes button must be disabled, and also we want some sort of indicator that the user must wait, that there is something going on behind the scenes, so that they know that there is some sort of validation going on. So let's solve both of those problems. Let's start with the indicator that there is something going on. For that I will put a spinner here. So let's come here. I want to come here to Visual Studio Code, to our Angular application. I want to come to my Products Form component class, and I want to come here because I want to import that spinner. There is a spinner in Angular material, and we're going to leverage it. So let me say here, math progress spinner module. I want to use this, and with this module I have access to that component. So let's come here. I want to come to the HTML, and what I will do is that inside of this math form field, I will say if, and remember that this control name is name, and therefore I can say here form controls name pending. We have a pending property here, which means that the validation is running, but it is not yet ready, and therefore while this is pending, I want to display the spinner. So let's do that. Math spinner. I will say here diameter 16 for the size. I want to say math suffix so that it gets correctly put into the math form field. And finally, I want to say here style. I want to add some margin. So margin right 1 rem. Alright, and believe it or not, this solves the first issue. So Ctrl-KS to save everything. Let's come back here. And let me wait a few seconds. Alright, so now let me click on here. Paste this here, click outside, and you are going to see that now we have this little spinner here, which is great. This is better. Now, as I was saying, meanwhile this spinner is spinning around, I want to disable this button that we have here. So let's do that. This is actually pretty straightforward. What we have to do here is that in this button, in the disable property, besides invalid, I want to check for pending. So form pending. Alright, and that's it. Save. Let's come back here. Pending means that the validation is still not done, and therefore, while the validation is being performed, I don't want the button to be enabled. And now if I come here and say this one more time, I will click outside of it, and you are going to see that this is still disabled, and when the validation gets done, and we see that it is invalid, therefore, the Save Changes button is not going to be enabled. Now if I put a 2 here, for example, which makes this name unique, and we click outside of it, we're going to see that we have Save Changes still disabled, and then after a few seconds, then we have it enabled. Excellent. Now, there is one final piece of the puzzle that we must do. Let's click on cancel, and let's see that we have several laptops here, right? So, we see that this name is repeated. That's okay, because that was done before our unique name validation. So, let me delete this, just so we don't have this discrepancy. So, what I want to do is to test whether I am able to come here to this laptop, come here, and let me say that I write here a 2, for example. Click outside of it, 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to see that everything is okay. But if I delete this and put the name as it was, click outside, we're going to see that we're going to get an error. Of course we get an error because there is already a laptop with this name, which is the same laptop, but that is not okay because I want to be able to update a laptop and leave the same name and not have an error that indicates that this same laptop have that same name. So therefore what we're going to do is that we're going to extend our functionality so that it takes into account that we can be in either creation mode or update mode. So let's see that. First, let's come back to Visual Studio. Let's come back to our web API, because what I want to do is that I want to receive here the ID of the laptop. Either we can use this same method or we can create a new endpoint. Both options are fine by me, but in my case, to keep things simple, I will just say here int ID. And then I will say, if ID is equal to 0, if it is equal to 0, it means that we are dealing with creation mode, and therefore we're going to use this logic. Otherwise, if it is different than 0, then it means that we are editing a laptop, and therefore I want to make sure that there is not another laptop with the same name. So let me say here, return await context laptops any async, and let me say here xname equal name and xid different than ID. So I want to make sure that there is not another laptop with the same name. Alright, so let me press Ctrl F5 to make sure that this gets updated. Alright, it is running. So now let's come to our Angular application, because I want to come to our product service, because here I want to be able to receive the ID. So number, and I will say here, let params equal to new HTTP params. We can use HTTP params as a mechanism for sending query strings. So let me say here params append ID and ID. Actually, I want to make this a string just to make my life easier so that I don't have to do conversions. So I will make it a string. And let me say here params. Alright, so with this I'm passing the ID as a query string. Alright, so now as you can see we have an error here because I need to pass the ID. Now how do we get the ID of the laptop from here, from this validation method? Well, there is a way, and that is that since the ID is here in the URL, we can get it using a service called activated route. With activated route, we're going to be able to get information from the URL. And that information, in our case, is this ID that we configured earlier in this course. So let me say app routes, and we're going to remember that we have this ID parameter defined here. So I'm going to get that ID through the activated route service. So let me do that. Let's come here actually. Let me say here const activated route equal to inject. I want to say inject activated route semicolon here, and now in here I will say const ID equal to activated route dot snapshot dot parammap dot get and ID. And if this is null, for example, if we are in creation mode, then there will not be an ID in the URL. Therefore, we're going to use coalesce and say by default 0. So the default value is going to be 0. So now I can pass the ID here. I wanted to say this. And believe it or not, this solves all of our issues. Let's see that. Ctrl-K-S to save everything. And let's come here. And let's wait a few seconds for this to update. Let's see that if we put a 2 here, this is going to work, of course. No errors. And now if we leave the same name, then we shouldn't get a validation error. And that was indeed the case. Excellent. And if we come here, for example, let me say that I want to get this from here. Let's make sure that this works. Click outside. And we have our validation error here. Excellent. And of course, if I come here to create new, this also still works. Alright, so as you can see, we were able to do some custom async validation in Angular. If you want to learn more about building applications with ASP.NET Core and Angular, buy my Udemy course today. Link with a discount in the description of this video. Thank you.